r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Lou_NS. I wish I never listened to my school's urban legends. I'm sure any student has heard scary stories spread by their peers. Folklore, if you will, maintained so well that the students from a decade ago could have told a similar tale. When I was in public school, it was Bloody Mary or some other spirit trapped in the confines of the hallways. However, after my parents decided to send me across the world to an English boarding school, the stories got a lot worse. As the school dated back to the late 17th century, the older urban legends still managed an influence in the study body. In fact, most stories revolved around a caste of nobility that many swore roamed the halls centuries ago. There were three princes, Ives, Elias, and Madoc, who, similarly to Greek mythology, governed a unique association. But in the twist that naturally came with childish horror, each prince held this relation with something dark and sinister, something that could be used to scare fellow classmates with. Thus, Ives was known as the Prince of Blood, Elias, the Prince of the Unknown, and Madoc, the Prince of Suffering. Tales of Ives, Elias and Madoc were spread as quickly as gossip, and many new additions to their already plentiful foundation were welcome. It became generally accepted that Ives and Madoc disdained their brother, Elias, and after school one evening, set him on fire. However, some still maintained that Elias was alive, and thrived in the unexplored forests surrounding the school, pulling in stray children to feed his brother, Ives. After a while, the stories seemed to become more ridiculous, and as I grew older, implausible. It was one of the things you lose growing up, a childish acceptance of your peers' stories, and by the age of 17, I had forgotten all about Ives, Elias, and Madoc, spare the occasional tale that was passed on by the younger students. The thought only recently re-entered my head after the disappearance of my classmate, Ian. Having vanished after an outing to the nearby town, many deterred from the teacher's plausible explanations to the more familiar, urban legends. It didn't take long before a story was spread. Ian was captured by Elias, a younger student explained to me while waiting in the cafeteria line. He's being tortured to satisfy his brothers, Ives and Madoc. If you look out your windows at midnight, you will see the three princes running around the school, searching for any more foolish, unsuspecting pupils. While I brushed off the story, Ian's disappearance never received any further details. Weeks followed without a trace, until one night, when I was up late to study. It was dark outside, and had been so for hours. I was on my laptop when suddenly a scream broke from outside. I stood up in my chair to look out the window, only to find a naked man running from the tree line and onto the main trail that led to the dormitory's back entrance. I made my way to the hallway, where I found a handful of other students peering their heads out of their doorways, looking at each other for an explanation. A group promptly formed to investigate. I followed them as they made their way slowly downstairs. I could still hear Ian screaming from outside, banging his hand against the wall. Once we made it to the front entrance, Ian's knocks had made it to the front entrance. We opened the door without hesitation. The boy ran inside like a wounded animal, bruised and naked, clutching himself from the cold. Ian was still screaming, and pointed to the door, as if he was trying to warn us. Just as he started to run to the corner of the room, the front door slowly creaked open, and we all looked up to see three dark figures, just far enough to be engulfed in shadows. I turned to face back to the stairs, but instead, I was outside, with the rest of my group and Ian. The figures strayed outside the darkness then, and I was now staring at the faces of men described endlessly in my youth. But while the stories described Ives, Elias and Madoc as cunning, the things in front of me could be no further from it. They shared no familial features, and instead, their faces were similar to serious burn victims. The rest of their bodies were wrapped in white, blood-stained sheets, which fell around their feet in dirty brown billows. The worst part about them was that there was nothing to distinguish one from the others. I took a moment to face each prince, as I could have either been looking at the Prince of Suffering, the Prince of Blood, or the Prince of the Unknown. The ambiguity frightened me, so I turned back to my group, and found that they too were looking at one another. After an eternity, the princes finally moved, and in a moment, they have surrounded us. When another moment passed, they moved again, this time, towards us, and we were left to run into the woods, away from the school. I ran as fast as I possibly could. I found Ian next to me, who, despite wearing no shoes, was able to maintain a steady distance from the princes. I kept my eye on him until he suddenly motioned for me to come to him, and we split from the group and hid behind a tree. After a minute of silence, the princes made their way past us. But instead of three before, there were only two then. I brushed it off after I noticed that, unlike the rest of my group, They walked slowly, waiting for them to slow down and grow weak. Ian kept his finger to his lips until he decided that we have gone undetected. "What the fuck was that?" I asked Ian, who kept his eyes on the distant trees. But he didn't respond, and instead, stayed put until I was forced to leave him to run back to the school. Once I returned, I found the dorms eerily still. Now, I stand in the darkness only after finding the door had been left strangely open, and the lights inside left off. I call up to the rooms, but I receive no response. I slowly make my way upstairs, and once I reach the top, bile climbs my throat. Pale bodies dot the hallway, each one covered in bruises and cuts.